Official transcript prepared from the Stillwater County Historical Society audio exhibit. Echoes from the Ridge. Narrator Dr. Ellis Moreland, folklorist, University of Tennessee, 1979 recording. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. What you're about to hear was compiled from court documents, sheriff's reports, and oral histories concerning the Hollowborn family tragedy of 1887. Though the evidence remains fragmented, the material paints a chilling portrait of isolation, faith, and madness within a single mountain household. 1. Discovery October 12, 1887 at dawn. Sheriff Harland Reeves rode into Stillwater Ridge after receiving an unsigned letter left at the post office window. The note contained only 9 words. Go to the old Hollowborn place before the frost. The Hollowborn cabin had been abandoned for nearly 10 years, its chimney leaning like a broken tooth against the gray sky. What Reeves found there would occupy investigators and moral philosophers for generations. The door stood ajar, snow already dusting the threshold. Inside lay a table set for 4, cups half, filled with what had long since turned to mold. The hearth was cold, yet ash patterns showed it had burned within the week. A faint scratching marked one wall, letters carved with something dull. Maybe a spoon, maybe a fingernail. Reeves recorded them in his journal. Mercy be our witness. Keep the circle sealed. No bodies were found, only signs of desperate habitation. Blankets layered over windows, jars of rainwater, and an iron chain anchored to a central beam. Reeves ordered the structure sealed until daylight. 2. The Hollowborn's reputation. The Hollowborn family had once been among Stillwater's most respected. Thomas Hollowborn, a self-taught preacher and herbalist, settled the Ridge after the war with his wife Abigail and their 3 children, Jonah, Ruth, and Esther. Local records describe him as a man of uncommon scripture memory and private habits. By 1880, the family withdrew entirely from community gatherings, claiming plague fears. Children who strayed near the property reported hearing chanting like church, but no words we knew. Adults dismissed the stories as mountain fancy. When the census taker rode through in 85, he found only Ruth at the gate. She claimed her parents had gone to wait upon the Lord in silence, and asked that no one disturb them. The census line for the family was left blank. 3. Evidence collected. Reeves's property search, conducted with Dr. Samuel Pruitt, yielded a small trove of artifacts, now preserved in the county archive. 1 leather-bound journal, spine-marked Hollowborn ledger, a rusted lantern filled with tallow containing strands of human hair, 3 wooden symbols resembling interlocking circles, scorched at the edges, a child's hymn book, pages rewritten in graphite with alternate verses referencing the quiet God. The journal contained dated entries from 1883 to 1887 in neat, deliberate handwriting. The earliest pages described crop yields and household repairs. By the middle entries, the tone shifted toward obsession. The air above the ridge hums at midnight. Abigail hears it too. We must keep the children within the circle until the song fades. The later pages dissolved into incoherence. Lists of names, measurements of moonlight, references to the hush before his returning. 4. Abigail's letter. Among the scattered papers, Reeves discovered a folded note addressed to whoever remembers Mercy. Its ink had bled, but portions remained legible. If this reaches eyes not blinded by zeal, tell them we sought only to quiet the sound. The ridge calls to itself. Thomas said the wind was God's breath, but it speaks back now, and he cannot close his ears. We have locked the circle, but it weakens. Forgive the children if they open it. The letter's date, October 3, 1887, placed it 9 days before the sheriff's discovery. 5 witness accounts. Sarah Langford, neighbor, recorded statement 1887. I seen smoke from that cabin again come the first frost. It weren't cook fire's smoke, too black. I thought maybe Thomas took ill. My boys begged me not to go. Said they heard singing up there like from under the ground. Jonas Pike, mill owner. Thomas Hollowborn bought a dozen lengths of chain and 2 barrels of salt back in August. said he needed to fix the foundation. Paid in old silver coins, the kind they stopped minting before the war. I figured it was none of my business. The statements suggested deliberate preparation, not accident. Reeves began to suspect ritual confinement. Someone or something kept inside that cabin. 6. Forensic findings. Dr. Pruitt's preliminary report, medical file WAT4, Stillwater Ridge, recorded several peculiar observations. Shallow depressions behind the cabin consistent with small burial plots, though soil disturbance indicated exhumation. Candle stubs arranged in a spiral pattern within the barn. Traces of salt along the thresholds and around the central beam. Chemical analysis confirmed the salt contained ash residue from multiple species of wood, suggesting intentional blending. A known feature of protective folk rites. Pruitt wrote, "Wither meant to guard or imprison. The circle was executed with extraordinary precision. The psychological strain required to maintain such vigilance over years could itself invite delusion." 7. The ledger speaks. As Reeves continued reading the Hollowborn ledger, he noticed consistent use of plural pronouns. We guard, we bind, we keep the hush. Yet by the final pages, only one hand seemed to write. The others sleep within the ring. Their breath keeps the wind away. If the ring breaks, the ridge will sing through me next. The handwriting trembled, the ink lighter as if from failing strength. The last entry, dated October 11, one day before discovery, read, "The frost begins. The quiet God knocks aches. The barn on October 15. Deputies returned to excavate the barn foundation. Beneath a layer of ash and pine boards they found 4 stones forming a crude altar. At its center lay a metal disc engraved with 3 circles. The same symbol burned onto the wooden tokens. Reeves's field sketch, preserved in evidence file Fa12, depicts scratches radiating outward from the stones, as though something had clawed the packed earth. No remains were recovered, only impressions suggesting human knees and palms pressed repeatedly into the soil. Pruitt noted, "It is impossible to determine whether these marks represent prayer or struggle." 9. Community reaction. News of the Hollowborn discovery spread across Stillwater County within a week. Preacher James Holloway condemned the family as heretics who listened to the wind instead of the word. Others whispered that Thomas had trapped a sickness inside the cabin, some curse carried by the air itself. By November, dozens of residents claimed to hear faint harmonics on cold nights, a sound described as like singing through glass. Reeves, fearing panic, sealed the site and posted armed watchmen. None lasted more than 2 nights. 10. The sheriff's final entry, the last entry in Sheriff Reeves's logbook, dated December 2, 1887, concludes the surviving record. "I returned alone to Stillwater Ridge before first snow. The cabin stands quiet. I broke the seal on the door to confirm all secure. The chain remains fixed to the beam, empty. Yet I found new words carved beneath the old ones. Letters clean, fresh, cut, though no hand has been here since I locked it. Circle unbroken. We keep the hush. I will not return again." Reeves resigned 3 weeks later, citing illness of the nerves. He died in 1891, leaving behind his badge and the Hollowborn ledger, which now rests under glass in the county museum. 11. Legacy. For nearly a century, scholars, spiritualists, and skeptics have debated the Hollowborn case. Some argue it reflects religious psychosis, a family consumed by their own fear of divine silence. Others insist the phenomena at Stillwater Ridge correspond with geological infrasound capable of inducing panic and hallucinations. Whatever truth lies buried beneath the cabin, the Justice Barn of later legends owes its name, not to murder, but to the unending human struggle to contain what we cannot explain. The exhibit narrator concludes, "The Hollowborn story endures because it speaks to the oldest terror of all, the moment when faith, isolation, and the natural world blur into something neither divine nor human. And still, when the first frost comes, the wind above Stillwater Ridge hums its hollow song." But the first winter storm of 1887 arrived 2 weeks earlier than any the valley had known. coating the ridges in gray ice and sealing Black Hollow beneath silence. Sheriff Danner's men slogged through drifts to reach the Whitlow farm, where every door gaped open and the hens had frozen in their roosts. Inside, the hearth lay cold, though half a cord of wood waited neatly by the door. On the table sat 3 untouched bowls of corn, mush already hardened to stone. The sheriff's notebook from that morning recorded his impression in a single line: house left in haste, yet nothing taken. Absence feels deliberate. Tracks in the snow led from the back porch toward the smokehouse. There, beneath the warped roof, they found what first appeared to be a mound of feed sacks. When the deputies lifted them, a smell of rust and river mud escaped. Beneath lay the Whitlow's tools arranged as though for inspection: sickle, draw knife, 2 hammer heads, each scrubbed to brightness. On the packed earth wall someone had written in charcoal, "Hey, counts what's his." Danner ordered photographs, though the camera's lens fogged from the cold before a single plate exposed properly. That night he and Dr. Macabre examined the barn. Its padlock hung twisted open, and straw lay flattened, as if by recent struggle. They found impressions in the hay resembling knees and elbows, a chain segment buried under feed. The metal was still polished from handling, though every animal had long fled. At the far stall a wooden bucket held melted ice, and a comb of human hair caught in its rim. Danner marked the evidence and closed the report with a phrase he would repeat often in the months ahead: "Order does not vanish, it inverts." The following morning, a boy from the valley road brought a note sealed in wax the color of river clay. It bore no signature, only the initials AW, pressed unevenly as if by a shaking hand. The message inside read: "The sickness left its house. Do not seek the cellar unless the hymn is finished." The sheriff, though known for superstition, dismissed it as a prank until Dr. Macabre pointed out that the wax-matched residue found on the barn floor. Over the next week the snow deepened. Search parties scoured the ridge, finding nothing but animal tracks and the occasional glint of metal in the drifts. Buttons, nails, fragments of wire. When the thaw came, water from the hills flooded the Whitlow root cellar and exposed what the sheriff's men had missed. Beneath the standing water lay 6 wooden crosses bound together by twine, their ends burnt black. Attached to one was a strip of fabric embroidered with the same initials that had sealed the note. The coroner's team drained the cellar using tin buckets and patience. Beneath the layer of silt they uncovered boards, cut precisely to coffin length, though no bodies rested within. Only the faint outlines of where something heavy had once pressed against the earth remained. Macrae's report noted that the soil contained high lime content, consistent with deliberate preservation or destruction of remains. During questioning, neighboring farmers admitted to hearing hymns drifting down the valley on nights without moon. The sound, they said, came from the Whitlow place long after its lamps went dark. Some thought the sisters had returned, others whispered that the old patriarch, Elias, had risen from the ground to reclaim his flock. Danner himself recorded hearing a woman's voice one night, repeating the same verse from Isaiah over and over: "Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow." Yet no footprints marked the fresh powder outside. 2 weeks later a freight driver bound for Johnson City reported seeing a lone figure walking the tracks in the storm's afterglow. The woman, barefoot and carrying what appeared to be a lantern wrapped in cloth, vanished into the cut near milepost 47. When the sheriff's men inspected the area, they found only a small circle of melted snow and a child's wooden toy carved with initials MW, a name belonging to the Whitlow's youngest, presumed dead these 3 winters. By early March, Carter County authorities considered closing the file for lack of evidence, but Danner refused. His persistence led to the final discovery that rewrote every assumption. Inside the courthouse basement, where seized property was stored, a clerk uncovered a sealed crate delivered months earlier without documentation. Its contents, when opened, revealed a collection of bound journals, each marked inventory of household faith. The handwriting matched Elias Whitlow's ledgers, but grew increasingly erratic across the volumes. The first entries concerned scripture and weather, ordinary matters of a farm preacher. Midway through the third volume, however, the tone shifted. He wrote of testing devotion through confinement, of the righteous silence that follows correction. The final pages dissolved into near, illegible scrawl, walls confess. They echo my own blood. Dr. Macrae's analysis of the ink showed it had been diluted with animal serum rather than water, a practice associated with folk healing rites meant to preserve truth against decay. The sheriff realized the cellar crosses might represent not graves but vows, binding oaths sealed by fire and lime. If so, the missing bodies were not victims but participants in a ritual of erasure. That theory gained weight when, in April, a letter arrived from the Tennessee State Hospital at Bolivar. It concerned a patient admitted under the name Anna Whitlow, who had appeared at their gate during the January storm. She carried nothing but a small Bible and a length of iron chain. Her first recorded statement to the matron was, "Hey, counts no more. The hymn is done." Danner and Macrae traveled to Bolivar to interview her. Hospital notes describe Anna as lucid in the mornings and unreachable by dusk, when she sang the same valley hymns reported by neighbors. During questioning she spoke of 3 offerings to mend the bloodline, and the 4th who must remain to tell. When shown photographs of the cellar crosses, she whispered, "We buried our names, not our dead." A Macrae's subsequent report concluded that prolonged isolation and inherited illness had produced a shared delusion among the Whitlows, one that transformed religious observance into a mechanism of self-punishment. He urged the sheriff to close the file, warning that continued inquiry would only excavate madness best left in the ground. Yet Danner could not ignore the final ledger, recovered from the courthouse crate. On its back cover, scrawled faintly in dried clay, were 6 words that froze every investigator who read them. Record ends when the hymn returns. That spring, church bells across Carter County began ringing without hands upon their ropes. The following morning began without sunlight. A weight of fog pressed down the hollow until the air itself tasted of ash. Sheriff Ransom and Dr. Whitlow arrived together just after dawn, bringing with them a deputy and a coffin maker named Herod, who had volunteered to assist. For the sake of Christian record, they found the barn door open, as if something had moved through in the night. The sheriff's written account, File No. 4 1886, preserved in Carter County Holdings, records his first impression. All instruments left in proper order, though dust newly disturbed. Rope ends frayed as if worried by hands or teeth. No footprints other than their own appeared in the mud, yet the smell was sharper than before, a mix of rust and turned soil that raised nausea even in the doctor. Inside the main chamber, the light from a single lantern revealed what none had expected. On the packed floor lay a circle drawn in lime, precise and deliberate, its edges pressed smooth with a trowel. At the circle's center sat a small wooden stool. Upon it rested a folded scrap of muslin, and atop that, an object roughly the size of a clenched fist, wrapped in brown paper and bound with thread. Dr. Whitlow loosened the thread and unfolded the paper. Inside lay a shriveled cluster of gray petals, the same mountain laurel that lined the Callaway fence. The doctor's report lists his reaction in careful script: petals dry, but exude faint moisture when handled. Odor unpleasantly sweet. Must have been sealed while green. The sheriff ordered the object placed in a glass jar. Beneath the stool they found a fragment of parchment bearing handwriting none could identify. The ink had blood in uneven strokes, as though written with a shaking hand. The words were few and cryptic: father's work unended. Bone calls bone. Light denies what blood remembers. The men carried the evidence outside, yet none spoke on the walk back to town. By afternoon, rumors spread faster than any official report could manage. Some claimed the sisters' ghosts had returned. Others said that Dr. Calloway himself had risen to reclaim his notes. The Methodist bell rang again at twilight, though no service had been announced. Reverend Toole later confessed to winding the rope himself, saying the air felt expectant, as if something unseen required acknowledgement. 2 days later, the sheriff summoned the county recorder to inventory the late doctor's remaining property. Among the attic contents they found 6 narrow volumes bound in calfskin, their covers unmarked. Each volume contained drawings, skulls, spines, and faces rendered in fine ink lines. Across the top of every page appeared a date and a name, most of which matched gravestones in the churchyard. What startled the recorder was that several pages bore the names of the living. One read, Evelyn Calloway, 1865, followed by the outline of a face left unfinished, the eyes represented only by hollow ovals. Beneath it, written in the same steady script, subject refuses closure, observe post-mortem reflects. Dr. Whitlow, upon examination of the books, concluded they were a study in inherited deformity, an attempt to trace resemblance through generations. His professional comment added, author believed moral tendency visible in bone curvature, demonstrates early obsession with hereditary vice. Sheriff Ransom, more practical, noted only that the ink was fresh, no more than a year old. The handwriting matched none of Abner Calloway's confirmed documents. That evening, the sheriff visited the remaining Calloway property, a stone house collapsing into its foundation. He described entering through the kitchen, where jars of preserved fruit lined the shelves, each coated with years of dust. The hearth held a blackened kettle half, filled with some thick residue. Against the far wall, hidden behind a torn drape, stood an instrument of uncertain design, a wooden frame strung with fine wires, some attached to small glass bulbs. A crank protruded from one side. The sheriff wrote, device resembles electrical engine demonstrated at county fair, but smaller and made with domestic tools. Not safe to touch. Whitlow insisted the contraption be dismantled, but before they could, the lantern sputtered and went out. Deputy Herod swore he saw a spark run the wires, like fire chasing rainwater. They left the apparatus intact and locked the door behind them. Later analysis of the frame by engineers from Johnson City determined it to be an early form of galvanic stimulator, used in crude experiments to revive muscle response in the recently deceased. The discovery altered the case's nature entirely. If the sisters had possessed such a device, what purpose had they served to their fathers? Work. The sheriff's diary, a private ledger found after his death, reveals doubts he never recorded officially. Not convinced, both girls perished natural, perhaps one yet lives. Evidence suggests continuation of practice under new hand. On October 29, 1886, the sheriff received an unsigned envelope containing a torn photograph. The image, though faded, depicted the Calloway barn by moonlight. A single figure stood in the doorway, long-haired, wearing a dark dress that seemed to blend with the shadows. Across the bottom margin, in graphite, someone had written, "She keeps the keys." When shown to Dr. Whitlow, he declined to comment, but requested that all material be sealed until the court inquiry concluded. His own health deteriorated rapidly thereafter. Within weeks he succumbed to a wasting fever diagnosed as pneumonia. After Whitlow's burial, the county clerk opened a trunk he had left in the office. Inside were notes transcribed from medical observations on the Calloway sisters, though no examinations had ever been publicly recorded. The first page reads, Subject E, exhibits persistent tremor of right hand. Eyes reflect intermittent dilation under low light. When spoken to about the barn, she repeats the phrase "who bound the air so it would not remember." The second page, half erased, adds, Subject L refuses to speak. Skin along collarbone shows pattern consistent with electrical burn. The implication, that both sisters had been seen alive, was quietly suppressed. Years later, when local historian Florence Green compiled her catalogue of regional anomalies, She described visiting the same hollow and finding a silence unlike any other landscape. The barn still stood, weathered but intact. On one beam, faint beneath soot, she discerned writing, "Let none unbind what was bound in mercy." The handwriting matched the unknown script from the parchment, found in 1886. Green concluded her account with a single speculation. Perhaps mercy and fear wear the same face when passed through generations. In the decades following, residents reported small disturbances around the old Callaway property. Animals found dead without injury, lights glimpsed between trees, the persistent hum of metal in damp air. County authorities dismissed such reports as superstition, yet a 1921 survey listed the hollow as unsuitable for habitation due to subterranean gas emissions, a bureaucratic way of fencing off what could not be explained. By then, the barn's reputation had shifted from scandal to legend. Children dared one another to touch its door and whisper their names. Farmers avoided the road at dusk, claiming their horses' shade at invisible shapes. And once a year, on the anniversary of the original investigation, the church bell still tolled 12 slow notes at sunset, though no hand was ever found on the rope. In 1932, an archivist named Robert Kincaid reopened the sealed box of Callaway evidence. His memorandum, dated May 11 of that year, provides the last official entry connected to the case. Materials degraded but legible. Lime sample from barn floor shows presence of bone dust, not animal. Handwriting analysis of parchment indicates mixed authorship. 2 separate pressure patterns alternating line by line. Conclusion message written jointly. Below that, in pencil, Kincaid added an unfiled remark. If 2 wrote as 1, perhaps 1 still answers. The barn remains under state preservation order. Visitors describe hearing a rhythmic tapping from within, steady as a heartbeat against wood. Scientists attribute it to the cooling of timber after sundown, but those who linger long enough say the sound grows irregular. Sometimes like breathing, sometimes like someone scratching to be heard. Winter 1933 settled over Carter County like a lid on a jar. Snow glazed the ridge paths and made the hollow silent enough that every strike of the church clock echoed twice. The sheriff's office, by then little more than a single-room outpost, received a telegram from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation requesting the transfer of the Callaway evidence collection to Nashville for review. The new administration wanted to modernize cold case procedure, and the Hensley Callaway matter was chosen as a test. Deputy Clara Finch, the only woman on staff, was assigned to prepare the shipment. Her later deposition describes that she began inventory alone at dusk, lantern on the floor, dust thick enough to dull her boots. Inside the evidence crate she found the glass jar, still sealed around the laurel petals, though moisture had gathered on the inside of the lid. When she lifted it to the light she noticed something new. Tiny root filaments spreading from the stem, alive despite 50 years sealed away. She marked the anomaly in her ledger and wrapped the jar in oilcloth. When she reached the last bundle, Dr. Whitlow's bound notes, Finch discovered several blank pages that had turned faintly gray at their edges. Under lamplight, handwriting appeared as if drawn by heat itself, a sequence of entries dated 1887, months after both sisters recorded deaths. The first read, "She walked beyond the gate last night." The smaller follows, "Carrying the coil." Father's voice travels through the wire still. Finch assumed it was a hoax added by earlier archivists, but when she turned the page her lantern hissed and flared blue. She doused the flame, repacked the notes, and locked the office until morning. The shipment reached Nashville in February, yet the Bureau never formally acknowledged receipt. 3 weeks later, a train manifest recorded that a wooden crate labeled CCH, the 112, had been lost in transit due to fire near Cookeville. Newspaper reports confirm a minor derailment at that location, but no mention of fire appeared in the engineer's account. Only one passenger, a surveyor returning from Johnson City, filed an affidavit describing a burst of green light beneath the second car. like lightning bottled. The Bureau's internal memo, declassified in the 1960s, notes simply, contents unrecoverable, case closed. Deputy Finch, refusing to accept the loss, rode to the site herself. She found no wreckage, only a ring of scorched earth the size of a dining table, and a shallow depression filled with melted glass. She took one fragment, a curved shard with traces of soil clinging inside, and stored it in a tobacco tin. For the rest of her life she kept it on her nightstand. Family members later said it emitted a faint ticking when the moon was full. In 1947, a journalist named Howard Bell wrote a serialized account for the Knoxville Register titled The Sisters of Mercy Hollow. He claimed to have interviewed an aging farmhand who once worked for the Callaways. The man, identifying himself only as a frame, described seeing Dr. Callaway perform resurrections of small creatures, using wires powered by the lightning rods atop his barn. Bell dismissed the tale as mountain folklore until the day after publication, when his apartment in Knoxville caught fire from an unexplained electrical surge. He survived but lost all notes. In his hospital statement he said only, "The current found its way home." Local churches declared the story blasphemous, yet attendance swelled that spring. Sermons invoked the sisters as symbols of justice and warning. Reverend Dowd of Mount Olive delivered a now famous line, "The wages of silence are resurrection of evil in the living." His words marked the beginning of what sociologists later called the Carter County Revival Movement, a wave of moral reform that swept through the Appalachian valleys for a decade. By mid-century, the barn itself had become a study site for regional historians. Photographs taken in 1952 show the structure surprisingly intact. In one image, carved letters on the central beam appear newly cut, though weathering elsewhere is severe. When enhanced under ultraviolet light, the carving reads, "Mercy keeps her promise." No modern tool marks were detected. The Tennessee Historical Commission enclosed the property with a wire fence and posted warning signs citing unstable foundation. Though visitors continued to trespass, a graduate student from Vanderbilt, Ellen Trotter, conducted an acoustic survey in 1963 to test the legend of the heartbeat sound. Her equipment registered low-frequency oscillations averaging 60 beats per minute, roughly human pulse rate, but no mechanical source. Her final paper, never published, included the statement, "Sound ceases only when one speaks the name Mercy aloud." She later withdrew from her program and moved west, refusing interviews. During the centennial year 1986, Carter County organized an official commemoration. The courthouse hosted an exhibit of documents, photographs, and facsimiles. The original materials, long presumed destroyed, were recreated from microfilm. On the event's opening day, a thunderstorm rolled across the valley. Witnesses say lightning struck near the barn at precisely noon, igniting dry brush, but leaving the structure unharmed. The next morning the beam with Silas's confessions had split clean through, exposing a cavity within the wood. Inside, firefighters found a rusted key ring holding two identical iron keys, their teeth filed into crosses. Analysis revealed metal composition consistent with 19th century blacksmith work from the Callaway Forge. Each key bore engraved initials, MH and CH. Local lore claimed the keys were for separate padlocks, once fixed to the barn door, yet historical photographs show only one. The curator recorded both objects as returned artifacts of unknown custody. That night, courthouse security reported the exhibit glass case fogging from inside. When staff opened it the next morning, condensation spelled the word Diwan. The case was resealed, the keys relocated to the state vault, and no further explanation entered the record. By the turn of the 21st century, interest in the Hensley, Callaway case revived among true crime researchers. Digital reconstruction of the trial transcripts revealed several redacted lines in the original stenographer's shorthand. Sections previously considered illegible. Computer enhancement produced partial sentences attributed to Judge Morrison himself during sentencing. and if ever the bond be broken, the mercy they invoked shall return as storm. Legal historians debated whether the line represented metaphor or superstition. None could explain why it had been omitted from official printings. In 2009, forensic specialists from the University of Tennessee visited the unmarked grave behind the courthouse for routine soil analysis. Ground-penetrating radar detected no coffin, only a hollow void descending nearly 6 feet beyond expected depth. When a probe sample was taken, the extracted material contained fine metal filings and traces of copper wire. The state quietly halted excavation, citing respect for religious sentiment. 2 years later, a volunteer preservationist discovered an unlabeled audio reel among unrelated courthouse materials. The recording, dated 1958, captured an interview between local historian Florence Green and a woman identifying herself as Charity. The speaker's age, estimated from voice analysis, would have been around 70, consistent with Charity Hensley had she survived. On the tape, the woman says softly, "Mercy went first, but she never left. I only carried the charge. When the wire hums, I know she's near." Near the end of the reel comes a faint crackling, followed by the sound of distant bells. The archivist who digitized the file in 2015 noted that the background noise corresponded exactly to the electrical frequency measured at the barn site half a century earlier. In 2020, storms again swept the hollow, toppling part of the barn's roof. Cleanup crews reported that beneath the fallen rafters lay an untouched patch of soil, circular and pale, the same lime mark described in 1886. Embedded at its center was a modern flashlight, still faintly glowing despite dead batteries. County authorities removed the object for study, its casing bore etching invisible except under ultraviolet. Light denies what blood remembers. That phrase, first seen on the parchment of 1886, closed the circle of the case. Whether copied, planted, or returned by some unknown hand, no one could determine. Today the hollow remains off limits except for supervised research. Drones surveying after sunset have recorded intermittent bursts of electromagnetic interference, forming patterns that, when graphed, resemble human cardiograms. The peaks correspond roughly to the heart rate logged in Ellen Trotter's 1963 data. Scholars call it coincidence, locals still call it Mercy's heartbeat. And yet, each autumn when fog settles thick along the creek bed, someone places fresh mountain, laurel branches on the courthouse steps. The petals are always slightly damp, as if just gathered from rain. No camera has ever caught the person who leaves them. Deputies collect the offerings before dawn, and the cycle begins again. The winter of 1889 settled over the Appalachian ridges like a shroud, burying the last whispers of the Hensley tragedy beneath layers of snow and superstition. Charity Hensley's departure from Tennessee passed without ceremony. Records show that she boarded a westbound train from Johnson City under the assumed name Clara Ruth Hale, a name chosen perhaps to honor her grandmother and the innocence she could never reclaim. The conductor's log, preserved in faded ink, lists her as a single woman, age 19, traveling with one trunk and a small satchel. No family awaited her in Colorado, no community to vouch for her history. She carried only the ghosts of Cove Creek Hollow and the lingering memory of her sister's last breath. Her arrival in the Colorado Territory marked the beginning of a strange, quiet existence. Mining towns along the Arkansas River recorded the appearance of a soft-spoken girl who claimed to be the orphaned daughter of a preacher. She took work as a laundress and later as a caretaker for a widowed schoolteacher's children. The local census of 1890 lists her among the transient domestic workers of Cannon City, but the notes scrawled by the enumerator contain an unusual comment. Girl bears visible scars on hands and arms, eyes of peculiar intensity, claims Tennessee origin. Though she tried to bury her past beneath the anonymity of frontier life, Charity's haunted demeanor stirred rumors among the locals. Children whispered that the new woman at the edge of town spoke to herself at night, addressing invisible figures in the dark. Some claimed she built a small cross from scraps of wood and kept it near her bedside, whispering the same prayer each night: "Lord, forgive us the justice we took with our own hands." In the following years, fragments of her life emerged through letters preserved in the archives of the Colorado Historical Society. One, addressed to a Miss Sarah Mullins in Carter County and postmarked 1891, begins in trembling script: "The mountains here are higher, but their shadows feel the same. Sometimes when the wind blows through the cottonwoods, I hear Mercy's voice calling my name, saying it's done, but never over." That was the last known correspondence from Charity Hensley. No record of her death exists in Colorado, though a small unmarked grave at St. Mary's Cemetery bears the initials CRH and the date 1893. Local tradition holds that the young woman buried there was found lifeless in her cabin after a night of violent storms, clutching a worn Bible marked with pressed wildflowers, identical to those found in Silas's journal. Whether this was truly Charity or another forgotten soul remains unresolved, yet investigators who revisited the Hensley archives in the early 20th century noted the eerie symmetry: both sisters, in life and death, bound by the same symbols that defined their suffering. Back in Carter County, the memory of the Hensley case refused to fade. By 1905, the old homestead had become a local cautionary landmark, whispered about by travelers and schoolchildren. Locals called it the Devil's Hollow, though official records referred to it by another name, Justice Barn. The site was preserved by the Carter County Historical Commission in 1911, following renewed public interest when an amateur historian discovered fragments of Silas's fingernail carvings still embedded in the beams. The inscriptions, though weathered, retained their dreadful clarity, each word a testament to madness, guilt, and the grim justice that had unfolded within those walls. Visitors to the barn often reported sensations difficult to explain. Horses refused to approach the threshold. Candles sputtered in still air. Some claimed to hear faint scratching from the wooden beams, as if unseen hands still tried to finish a confession left incomplete. Sheriff Wittman's surviving deputy, then an old man, returned to the site in 1912 at the request of a journalist from Nashville. His statement, recorded in the Tennessee Gazette, reflected the uneasy reverence that the story commanded. "There weren't no monsters in that barn. Only what folks made of each other when God's eyes turned away. That place don't just hold death. It holds reckonin'." As decades passed, the Hensley case evolved from historical tragedy to moral parable. Criminologists cited it in early 20th century textbooks as one of the earliest documented examples of victim-perpetrator transformation. Psychologists studied the sisters' behavior as a case of prolonged trauma culminating in retributive violence. Church historians, however, interpreted it as a warning about the perils of distorted scripture and patriarchal isolation. Each generation sought its own meaning in the carved words and the cold facts preserved in brittle paper and iron chains. In 1936, during a Works Progress Administration survey of Appalachian folklore, interviewer Ruth E. Langley collected local oral histories that still referenced the sisters. One elderly resident described them not as murderers, but as the Lord's own instruments, set loose on the devil that wore a man's skin. Others claimed that every October, on the anniversary of Silas's death, faint lamplight could be seen flickering through the cracks of the abandoned barn, though no living soul entered. Langley's report, filed under Appalachian Case Study, Fan 27, concluded with a haunting observation: where the law ends, the mountain builds its own kind of scripture. The Hensley sisters wrote theirs in chains and blood. By the mid-20th century, the barn had become an academic curiosity. Forensic students and criminal psychologists visited the site, analyzing its preserved evidence as part of early criminological training. Yet even among scientists, unease lingered. A 1954 report by Dr. Harlan Moore of the University of Tennessee noted, "The structural acoustics of the barn create unexplained low frequency vibrations, perhaps accounting for reports of whispers or movement. Still, even the rational mind cannot ignore the moral resonance of this place. The physical artifacts, chains, journals, dried flowers, and the warped Bible, were transferred to a climate-controlled facility in Nashville in 1968. Each item catalogued, measured, and preserved. Yet none could fully contain the weight of what they represented. When historians opened Silas's ledger for public viewing, the ink had faded to a reddish hue resembling dried blood. Visitors often reported an overwhelming sense of nausea or sorrow upon reading the passages, as if the words themselves retained psychic residue. In recent decades, the Hensley case has resurfaced in modern criminology programs and ethical debates about justice and victim agency. Legal scholars still reference Judge Morrison's sentencing as one of the earliest recognitions of moral complexity in criminal acts born from prolonged abuse. Feminist historians view the sisters not as villains, but as early symbols of defiance against patriarchal domination, while theologians interpret their revenge as a distortion of divine justice born from unbearable suffering. Tourists occasionally make pilgrimages to Carter County to see what remains of the Justice Barn. The air inside is perpetually cool, even in summer, and the carved words, though faint, remain visible beneath protective glass panels. Locals still leave offerings at the site: small crosses, faded ribbons, or handwritten prayers asking for deliverance from generational curses. The surrounding forest has reclaimed much of the property, but the barn endures, its beams holding both history and warning. Today, the official exhibit at the Carter County Historical Society concludes with a line etched on a bronze plaque. This site stands as witness that silence protects sin, and truth demands voice, no matter the cost. Beneath the plaque rests a small box containing soil from the sisters' graves, reunited symbolically in death though buried worlds apart. Visitors often describe the experience as humbling, others as deeply unsettling. The Hensley story, stripped of sensationalism, reveals not only human cruelty, but the endurance of conscience within unimaginable darkness. More than a century later, historians continue to debate whether Mercy and Charity's act was justice, madness, or divine retribution. Yet the carved confession of their brother remains the final word. A man condemned not by law, but by his own hand, in a place where evil met its mirror. And still, on quiet October nights, the locals say the wind through the rafters carries faint echoes of Mercy's last words, spoken as the deputies led her away. "We done what the Lord should have done, and may He forgive us for doing it first." By the 21st century, the Hensley case had crossed the line between local folklore and national fascination. The once forgotten crime of the isolated Tennessee Hollow had become a cautionary tale studied in classrooms, dissected in documentaries, and whispered in true crime circles as one of the darkest family tragedies ever recorded in Appalachian history. The Justice Barn, preserved now behind reinforced glass and motion sensors, drew thousands of visitors each year. Historians, thrill seekers, and those searching for something deeper than morbid curiosity. At the Carter County Historical Society, archivists still handle the original files with white gloves. The papers, browned and fragile, smell faintly of mildew and smoke, remnants of the cabin fire that consumed the Hensley home. Decades after the sisters' imprisonment, every photograph, every signature tells a piece of a puzzle no one has fully solved. Some pages bear smudges of what testing later confirmed as human blood, leading many to wonder if Mercy herself handled the documents during her final days of captivity before the arrest. The barn's preservation, first ordered in 1911, was renewed in 2003 when local historian Dr. Evelyn Hart spearheaded the Carter County Truth and Silence Project. Hart's stated goal was to transform sites of suffering into monuments of understanding. Yet even she admitted that the Justice Barn resisted interpretation. "It's as if the walls remember," she said in a 2007 interview. "Every visitor feels the story, not just reads it." The interior remains unchanged. The original beams still bear Silas's scratched confessions, though protective resin prevents further decay. The iron shackles, once caked with rust and blood, hang preserved in glass beside a placard reading simply, "Used in captivity of one, by victims of many." The journal, displayed open to the entry titled "Household Record of Mercy and Charity," still causes discomfort among viewers. One visitor described the experience in a guestbook entry, "I came looking for history, but found judgment staring back." In 2014, forensic anthropologists from the University of Tennessee returned to re-examine the 3 small graves discovered behind the Hensley cabin over a century earlier using modern DNA sequencing. They confirmed that the infants were direct descendants of Silas Hensley. Biological evidence that proved beyond dispute the full extent of his crimes. The findings reignited public discussion about the blurred lines between justice and vengeance. News outlets called it the Appalachian incest case that changed American law, and for a brief moment, the Hensley sisters' story resurfaced as a grim mirror of history repeating itself in isolated corners of the modern world. That same year, a team of documentarians began filming a series titled "Bound by Blood: The Hensley Tragedy." The series combined archival records with reenactments based on court transcripts, bringing to life words long trapped in paper. During production, a strange occurrence unsettled the crew. Audio engineers reported hearing faint tapping and whispered phrases captured on ambient microphones within the barn. Though no one was inside at the time, when the recordings were enhanced, a single word seemed to emerge repeatedly: mercy. The production team dismissed it as interference, but the sound technician, who archived the files later, refused to re-enter the site. Paranormal theories, though officially dismissed by historians, became part of the Hensley legend. Visitors to the Justice Barn often leave claiming to have felt sudden temperature drops, or to have seen impressions appear in the dust near the beams. Small handprints, roughly the size of a child's. Others say the barn's silence hums, as if alive with grief. The county forbids overnight visits, yet that restriction only fuels the fascination. Modern criminologists view the Hensley case as an essential study in generational trauma and the psychology of vengeance. In 2018, Dr. Nora Kendall, a forensic psychologist, presented a paper at Vanderbilt University titled "The Theology of Captivity: The Hensley Sisters and the Ethics of Retributive Justice." She argued that the sisters' decision to kill Silas was both a result of moral reasoning and its collapse. They acted as judge, jury, and executioner. She wrote, but only because the law, the church, and their community had abandoned their duty long before. The presentation reignited debate among legal scholars, many of whom saw echoes of the Hensley case in modern systems that fail victims of abuse. Several states, including Tennessee, cited the historical precedent when updating their statutes regarding victims of prolonged domestic imprisonment. What began as a single family's nightmare had quietly influenced the evolution of victim rights law more than a century later. Still, for the residents of Carter County, the Hensley name remains a kind of taboo, a word spoken with reverence and dread. Local children dare each other to touch the barn door, though few ever do. School teachers tell the story not as ghost tale, but as moral parable. In town folklore, mercy and charity are remembered less as murderers than as tragic saints, souls who carried their burden so that others might be spared. Yet not everyone believes the story ended with them. In 2020, during restoration of the barn's foundation, workers uncovered a small wooden box buried beneath the threshold. Inside were 2 objects, a rusted key and a scrap of paper so deteriorated that only a few words could be read. "Forgive him, Lord, for we could not." Forensic dating placed the handwriting within the late 1880s, consistent with Mercy's confinement period. Whether it was her final act of repentance or a message left for the world remains unknown. The discovery drew renewed media attention and sparked a new wave of visitors. Some came seeking the truth, others absolution. But the barn offered neither. It remains unchanged, a frozen moment of human suffering, preserved not to sensationalize, but to remind. The plaques, the journals, the corroded chains all whisper the same messages: silence kills faster than violence, and neglect is its accomplice. Each October, on the anniversary of Silas's death, the Carter County Historical Society hosts a candlelight vigil at the site. Locals gather in the field where the cabin once stood, singing old hymns while the wind moves through the timbered hills. A single light is left burning in the barn through the night. No one knows who began the tradition, but it endures, perhaps as penance, perhaps as promise. Those who have stood there speak of a strange peace that settles once the candles fade. The hollow that once echoed with screams now carries only the murmur of leaves and the distant cry of night birds. Some swear that if you stand long enough, you can still hear a faint woman's voice, carried on the wind, repeating the words carved into the beam. More than a century ago, we'd done what the law never would. Whether legend or truth, the Hensley sisters' story survives, not just in archives, but in the uneasy conscience of a region that once chose silence. It reminds those who listen that justice delayed can become something else entirely. A darker reflection of righteousness born from pain. And as long as the justice barn stands, its shadows will continue to bear witness that within even the deepest evil, there are hands that reach for light, though they are stained forever by the darkness they had to fight. By the time the internet age arrived, the Hensley sisters' story had taken on a life of its own, half historical record, half ghost legend. What had begun as brittle paper files locked away in the Carter County archives now existed in thousands of digital forms: scanned documents, grainy photographs, speculative podcasts, dramatized videos, and online forums where truth seekers debated the morality of the sisters' actions late into the night. The first viral retelling came in 2012, when an independent filmmaker uploaded a short documentary titled Mercy and Charity, Angels of the Hollow. The video combined historical photos, trial transcripts, and a haunting violin score, ending with a slow pan over the justice barn at dusk. Within days it was shared millions of times. Viewers argued passionately. Were the sisters heroes, victims, or monsters? The comment sections filled with scripture quotes, legal arguments, and confessions from survivors of similar abuse who claimed the sisters had given them a voice in history. As the story spread, truth blurred with myth. Social media users began claiming the barn was haunted by the sound of rattling chains, or that anyone who took a splinter of wood from its beams would suffer nightmares. Urban explorers snuck onto the property to film evidence, posting shaky night vision videos that caught flickering lights or strange figures near the doorway. Each upload reignited fascination and controversy. The Carter County Historical Society, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of attention, released a public statement in 2013 urging respect for the site. The Justice Barn is not a haunted attraction, it read. It is a memorial to suffering and to a community's failure to act. Yet curiosity only grew. Within months, visitors from across the U.S. were traveling to the Hollow, leaving offerings at the site: rosaries, children's toys, carved initials, and hand-written prayers for mercy. Local law enforcement began patrolling nightly to prevent trespassing, but the barn's reputation as a place where truth speaks through wood had already taken hold. Videos of candlelight vigils spread across platforms. True crime podcasters devoted multi-part series to the case, some using archived audio of the 1886 trial stenographer's notes, others dramatizing the sisters' final confrontation with Silas. A few episodes reached millions of listeners, blending empathy with horror in a way that turned the Hensley tragedy into both history lesson and entertainment. Not everyone approved. Descendants of families who had lived near the Hensleys during the 19th century petitioned to close the archives, claiming the constant sensationalism disrespected the dead. They were real people, one descendant wrote in a local op-ed. Not characters in a ghost story. Their pain shouldn't be repackaged for clicks. But for many, the case had become something more, a mirror reflecting society's enduring fascination with vengeance disguised as justice. In 2017, digital historian Michael Trent began compiling a full interactive archive called The Mercy Files, which allowed users to explore every surviving document, journal entry, and photograph in virtual reality. The project drew international attention for its realism. Users could walk through a 3D reconstruction of the barn, hear readings of the sisters' confessions, and view annotated transcripts of Silas's journal. The experience was described as both breathtaking and unbearable. Some users reported leaving the simulation in tears, others accused the creators of exploiting trauma for technology. When asked about the controversy, Trent replied, "The Hensley sisters aren't horror icons, they're evidence. Their story forces us to question what we call justice when the law abandons its duty." His words reignited debate among ethicists, who began referencing the Hensley case in lectures about the moral boundaries of vengeance. By 2021, the line between history and myth had blurred entirely. TikTok creators reenacted courtroom testimony in short monologues. Others filmed themselves reciting Mercy's final words. "Don't need no lawyer when truth's carved in wood." The trend, tagged for Mercy and Charity, went viral. Teenagers lip-synced to distorted audio of the original quote, while older viewers flooded comment sections to remind them that this was no fiction. It had really happened. The renewed exposure brought both funding and fury. Carter County used tourism revenue to preserve the barn more carefully, but also fenced off public access. Researchers were allowed entry only by appointment, and every visitor was required to sign a statement acknowledging that the site was not to be treated as spectacle. Still, videos continued to appear, often filmed from the tree line, where the glow of flashlights painted moving shadows against the barn's boards. In 2023, a new mystery reignited interest. During a digital scanning project of the barn's interior, a historian discovered faint writing beneath layers of soot. Near the foundation beam, when enhanced under ultraviolet light, the words read, "Mercy fell first, but I keep her promise. The hollow remembers." The handwriting matched Charity Hensley's known script. The message, unseen for more than a century, seemed to confirm that Charity herself had returned to the barn after her release from prison, possibly before leaving for Colorado. The discovery shook the historical community. It implied that Charity's bond to the place had never been broken, that she may have come not out of guilt, but to ensure the truth survived. Speculation exploded online. Was the message a confession or a warning? Some theorized she buried additional items still undiscovered beneath the floorboards. Others insisted she simply couldn't leave behind the place where justice, however twisted, had been done. The Carter County Museum sealed off the new writing from public access, but that only deepened the mystery. In a 2024 interview, curator Dr. Leila Monroe summed up the ongoing fascination. The Hensley case endures because it isn't just about what happened. It's about what could happen again. It's the question we still can't answer when justice fails the innocent. What are they supposed to do? Now, in 2025, nearly a century and a half after Silas's death, the barn still stands. Its wood has darkened, its beams reinforced, but its message remains unchanged. Tourists still leave offerings, photographs of daughters, ribbons, notes that read, "We hear you." Every item becomes part of the living archive, an echo of pain transmuted into remembrance. As night falls over Cove Creek Hollow, the barn looms silent, its shadow stretching across the field like a scar. And those who pass close enough swear they can still feel the weight of that old Appalachian air, heavy with both sin and sorrow. The story of the Hensley sisters, two broken women who took the law into their own trembling hands, remains not just a chapter in Tennessee's history, but a warning carved in wood. whispering across time, "Mercy ends where silence begins." The 1893 inquiry into the fragmented case files of Charity Wetherell, formerly Charity Hensley, opened with the arrival of a package at the Carter County Clerk's office, addressed in an unsteady feminine hand and postmarked from Trinidad, Colorado territory. Inside lay a thin bundle wrapped in oilcloth, one small diary, several yellowed letters, and a clipping from the Trinidad Enterprise, dated June 3, 1892. The contents bore no introduction, only a single notation written in blue pencil on the outer sheet, "To be returned to the proper record of our family's undoing." The clerk who received the parcel, Mr. Amos Boyd, documented its condition in his logbook, observing that the package gave off an odor of mildew and that faint reddish staining discolored one corner of the wrapping, as though water or thin blood had once soaked through. The materials were forwarded to Dr. Garrett's successor, County Coroner Elias Dunham, who opened a formal inquiry. His report, preserved in the State Archive, provides the first official record of Charity's life after her release. The diary began on September 14, 1889, 6 months after her departure from Tennessee. Her handwriting, though clumsy, was newly practiced, suggesting the recent lessons taught in the penitentiary's literacy program. The earliest pages speak of long train rides and a desire for silence. "No one here knows my name nor where I come from. I carry nothing but a Bible and what God did not take from my bones." She wrote of employment as a domestic servant in a boarding house owned by Mrs. Leila Farrow, a widow who described Charity as quiet, obedient, and troubled by strange sleep. Neighbors later testified that she avoided church services and spent Sundays walking the dry river beds, murmuring verses under her breath. By December 1890 her entries grew erratic. She complained of the sound of knocking within the walls and of voices that used the accent of Tennessee, though none in town spoke it. "They call my name from behind the plaster," she wrote, "and the more I pray, the closer they come to the floor." The handwriting thickened with tremor, the ink blotted in frantic loops. Dr. Dunham's appended notes speculate mild delusion caused by trauma, though a subsequent affidavit by Mrs. Farrow described physical phenomena: furniture found shifted overnight, sheets torn without visible reason, and the repeated scent of damp pine, despite the arid climate. In the spring of 1891, Charity vanished for 9 days. Her employer reported her missing, but she returned unannounced, thinner, carrying what she called proof that the Lord heard. The proof was a small wooden cross carved from unfamiliar wood. Samples examined later by Dr. Dunham matched oak native to eastern Tennessee, aged approximately 5 years. The same period since the Hensley barn had been sealed for preservation. How such material reached Colorado remains undocumented. The following winter brought the final diary entries, dated January 1892. Her last legible passage reads, "I see him not as he was but as we left him, reaching for water. He says the ground is colder here, that it waits for me to finish the prayer I forgot." After that, the text devolves into unfinished sentences and faint impressions of scripture, chiefly from the Book of Job. The ink ceases midline. The Trinidad Enterprise clipping enclosed with the diary reported the discovery of a woman's body in an abandoned assay office outside town. Local authorities found no signs of foul play, only an improvised altar constructed from mining tools and pine branches arranged in a cross. The woman, identified by papers as Charity Wetherell, appeared to have died of exposure during the night. The coroner's note concluded that she had sat willingly before her own judgment. Dr. Dunham's commentary, appended in 1894, treats the case as a continuation of the Hensley tragedy, emphasizing hereditary melancholy and what he termed familial contamination of mind through shared delusion. He compared the handwriting in the Colorado diary with Mercy's prison statements, noting nearly identical phrasing in matters concerning divine reckoning, which led him to theorize that the sisters had maintained correspondence unseen by prison censors. No such letters survive, Yet a penciled fragment on the diary's inside cover reads, "Tell her I'm near the barn again." Further investigation into the parcel's origin revealed no living relative willing to claim the remains. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Farrow, testified that a stranger had visited shortly before Charity's disappearance. A traveling preacher who inquired about a woman once bound to a man of sin. His description, later circulated among Tennessee lawmen, resembled Jacob Crawford, the former mill owner implicated in the original case, though Crawford had reportedly died in 1888. Dunham's final note in the file records this discrepancy with restrained unease. If the man was not Crawford, then his likeness was sent by whatever justice governs such matters. The remains of Charity Wetherell were buried on county land outside Trinidad, with no marker save a cedar post. The diary and letters were sealed into the Carter County Archive upon return, where they rest today in Box 14, File 23. Labeled only, Western Continuation of the Hensley Matter. Historians visiting the archive in later decades remarked upon the diary's peculiar state of preservation. Despite evidence of moisture exposure, the ink remains vivid, and the pages exude a faint odor of smoke and iron, as though the book had once been held near fire and blood together. A marginal note added by an anonymous archivist around 1915 remarks, "When handled, one may feel warmth at the center binding, increasing toward midnight hours." The note was later struck through in red pencil, but remains legible beneath the correction tape. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Miriam Lowe, who examined the contents during the 1937 statewide re-cataloging of criminal archives, recorded an additional observation not included in her official report, but preserved in her private correspondence. The handwriting seems to alter under light. What is legible at noon is obscured by dusk, and faint impressions of new words, mostly names, appear across the margins. She declined to pursue further study. Among local historians of Carter County, the legend that grew from these records remains quietly persistent. They tell of a thin woman who walked the hills near the old barn each October, reciting fragments of prayer until dawn. Some swear that the beam bearing Silas's scratched confession now carries another layer of script, shallower but neater, new words that were not present when the site was first sealed. The caretaker who tends the property, Mr. Hal Bennett, reported in 1951 that he found a child's cross carved into the outer door in wood, distinctly unlike the barn's aged pine. Its grain, when compared by state inspectors, matched cedar typical of Colorado. Officially, the inscription was dismissed as vandalism. Unofficially, the object was removed and stored in the county museum, where it remains catalogued without public display. Those who have handled it say the same thing Charity wrote in her final entry, that the surface feels warmer than it ought to be. When the Carter County Historical Commission reopened the Hensley Evidence Archive in 1956 for the Centennial exhibit, the curator, Helen Barr, found that several files had been tampered with. Box 14, the so-called Western Continuation, contained the Colorado Diary, Dunham's annotations, and a sealed envelope labeled Photographs, Barn Interior. Restricted. Barr's report to the State Records Board noted that the wax seal on the envelope had softened and re-hardened, as though exposed to heat. Inside were 6 photographs printed on brittle albumen paper. 5 corresponded to known investigation images, the 6th did not. The unknown photograph showed the interior of the preserved barn after the 1930s restoration. The carved confession on the beams was visible, but across the lower frame appeared 2 new shadows, positioned as though kneeling. When enlarged, the figures lacked faces. The state archivist dismissed it as a double exposure, but Barr's handwritten memo attached to the box margin reads, "Original negative absent. Print temperature above ambient." She stored it separately in a temperature-controlled drawer, where it remains. Barr's cataloging process recovered other inconsistencies. Several early documents contained faint secondary impressions, as if a damp page had lain over wet ink decades earlier. Words appeared backward. Still hungry. Still waiting. She attempted chemical treatment to stabilize the bleed, but the conservator withdrew after reporting dizziness and auditory disturbances during the procedure. The treatment was discontinued. In the following months, Barr kept a private notebook, later donated by her daughter. Her entries echo those of Dr. Dunham: calm observation, creeping unease. March 2, 1957. The barn records breathe. Each time I unlock the drawer, there's the smell of soil after frost. April 19. Tonight the faint sound again, tapping behind the case. I counted 12 knocks, then silence. The tapping pattern, 12 intervals, matched the documented length of Silas's captivity. By the summer of 1957, the Historical Commission prepared to close the exhibit. Before doing so, Barr invited local photographer Alan Kersey to capture a final set of preservation shots. His negatives, rediscovered in 1998, show a detail unnoticed at the time. On the beam nearest the west window, beneath the original gouged text, new markings appear. 3 vertical scratches forming a crude initial C. County inspectors confirmed the mark was fresh, carved after the restoration sealant had hardened. The barn was locked and alarmed. No entry records exist between 1951 and 1957. Official commentary within the museum minutes attributed the scratches to an insect burrow or temperature contraction. Yet Barr's last journal entry, dated the night before she resigned her post, refers directly to them. She has written her name where he wrote his guilt. Barr left Carter County the next morning and never returned. Subsequent curators reported occasional disturbances, catalog cards misplaced, ink bleeding through labels, the faint echo of footsteps during storm nights. Nothing was formally documented until 1984, when archivist John Purcell conducted a full microfilm transfer. His typed report, page 72, records that the scanning light triggered brief flaring on the film whenever it passed the page containing Mercy's last diary statement. The flares formed a repeating pattern interpreted by analysts as random artifact. Purcell, however, annotated the margin in pencil, 12 flashes exactly. The microfilm reels, preserved today in digital format, retain those distortions. Technicians attempting color correction describe spectral traces, resembling human silhouettes momentarily aligning with the beam engravings. When the digital restoration team slowed the footage to single-frame playback, they noted that one silhouette extended a hand toward the carved letters. At frame 74 the hand halts, index finger outstretched, pointing not at Silas's confession, but toward the lower margin of the frame, where, decades later, the letter C would appear. By the early 2000s the barn had become a state landmark. Visitors describe the air inside as colder than the surrounding field even in summer. The guidebooks make no mention of Charity or Mercy, referring only to the 1886 family tragedy. But among staff, a local superstition persists. Each October 24th, on the anniversary of Silas's death, the small wooden cross stored in the museum's climate vault releases a faint resinous scent, stronger toward midnight, and the recording sensors register a single creak from the locked barn despite no wind. The 2011 preservation audit introduced thermal imaging. Technicians documented an area of residual warmth around the west beam, roughly the shape of a kneeling figure. The heat signature faded within minutes of detection. When compared against archival photographs from the 1890s, the contours matched the position of Charity's body, as described in the Colorado autopsy. Arms folded, head inclined. The audit file concludes without hypothesis, but one reviewer appended a final note in ballpoint pen. Her punishment continues, or her prayer does. Today the Carter County Historical Museum denies all paranormal claims, yet internal correspondence obtained through public record requests shows quiet concern about the deterioration of Box 14. Paper fibers there exhibit abnormal darkening, concentrated along the same words that reappear across multiple copies: Mercy, Charity, Water. Every few years, a volunteer suggests retiring the exhibit entirely. The board refuses, citing educational value and steady attendance. Each insists the story must remain public so that evil done in isolation may never hide again. Yet some visitors whisper that the preservation itself is what sustains it. That as long as the confession remains displayed, and the diaries remain handled, something within them stays awake. In the archive's temperature logs for October 24, 2019, the entry at 20:30:47 records a 2-degree increase confined to Cabinet B, the drawer holding the unknown photograph. The attendant noted hearing a slow knock from within wood. The logbook ends there for the night. The next morning the staff found a single line scratched across the drawer's metal front. Still waiting. When the restoration project concluded in 2023, the Preservation Board commissioned a final assessment to determine whether the Hensley material should remain on display or be sealed under restricted access. The task fell to Dr. Eva Lind, a forensic archivist from the University of Tennessee, chosen for her reputation for methodical skepticism. Her report, Document 2023-C, was meant to end all superstition and restore the site's dignity as mere history. Her first entry, dated April 2, describes the journey up the narrow mountain road toward the old hollow. The fields, she wrote, were the color of bone dust, and the barn stood patient, as though listening. She unpacked calibration instruments, temperature sensors, acoustic recorders, chemical analyzers. The logs show precise notation: ambient 47 degrees F, humidity 39%, air still. The second day she began re-cataloging box 14. Several pages of the Mercy transcript had become translucent, their lettering appearing as faint gold sheen under infrared. The chemical analysis registered no metallic trace. Dr. Lind's notes remain purely procedural until the entry for April 4, when she records a sound. Metallic clicking, 12 repetitions, evenly spaced. The recorder picked up only static. She wrote, likely expansion of building timbers. Nonetheless, unnerving. On the fifth night, April 6, she set the audio monitor near the west beam where the letter C had been carved. At 20:17 a.m., the device captured a slow dragging sound and a faint intake of breath. The waveform's frequency fell below normal human range. Subsequent analysis confirmed the microphone was undisturbed. The board dismissed it as equipment malfunction. Lind kept working. Her field diary, however, took on the careful tone of someone writing both for record and for confession. They have learned the pattern of my steps, she wrote. Each time I cross the threshold, the air shifts backward, as though exhaling the memory of the last visitor. Later entries grew shorter. He is not gone. They are not forgiven. On April 9, she noted finding residue on the beam surface, iron oxide mixed with calcium phosphate, consistent with human blood. The forensic lab report confirmed the presence of degraded DNA strands, matching early samples from the Hensley line, stored in the Carter County Archive. Yet the control timestamp of the specimen extraction showed 1886. No modern cross-contamination was found. The file closes with her signature and the single word D. Inconclusive. She did not file another report. 2 days later, the local sheriff responded to an emergency call from the museum guard. The barn door had been found ajar at dawn. Inside lay Lind's recording equipment, the instruments neatly arranged in a semicircle facing the west beam. Her coat was still on the hook. Her notes remained open on the table. The final page reads, "He reached for water. I reached for truth. We both found chains." Dr. Lind herself was never found. The board quietly suspended the exhibit. Public explanation cited structural instability and funding shortages, but internal correspondence, released later under archival transparency orders, shows the preservation team refused to re-enter the barn after Lind's disappearance. Night watch logs from that week report the same phenomenon recorded a century earlier, a low knocking sound, 12 intervals, followed by silence. When the state sealed the property, they left the contents intact: beam engravings, shackles, and all documentation locked within. Yet witnesses claim that the padlock rusts faster than the surrounding metal, as if handled by unseen moisture. Each October, maintenance crews replace it. finding it warped or streaked with reddish residue resembling dried tears. The legend persists in Carter County. Truckers traveling the Ridge Road say that on cold mornings a woman's voice whispers from the fog, repeating the same phrase found carved into the drawer in 2001 Dean Z. Still waiting. Local children dare each other to leave stones at the courthouse's unmarked grave. Claiming the stones vanish by sunrise, the Tennessee Historical Society continues to deny involvement in any further study. Their official website lists the Hensley incident as closed collection, yet one digital curator's hidden metadata tag within the image database bears a private message left on October 24, 2024. Her chain holds fast. Do not open box 14. For now, the barn stands sealed beneath tar and dust. The carved words dimmed but legible, the surrounding field gone to wild fennel and briar. The air inside never warms. Those who have stood close enough to the door insist the boards still expand in measured rhythm. 12 pulses, like breathing slowed by prayer. And sometimes, faintly beneath the hum of cicadas, a second rhythm answers from within, quieter than memory, but as steady as guilt. One exhalation, one word, carried through wood and dust. Mercy,